Good evening, everyone. Notice is hereby given that the City Council of the City of Alpine, Texas will hold a regular meeting at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, December 1st, 2020 in the Civic Center, 803 West Holland, and via Zoom conference in the City of Alpine, Texas. Meeting login details may be found at www.cityofalpine.com for the purpose of considering the attached agenda. This notice is posted pursuant to the Texas Open Meeting Act, Section 551.043, Texas Government Code. Members of the audience will be provided an opportunity to address the council on any agenda item after determination of a quorum or proof of notice of the meeting. Zoom meetings, comments, and questions, rules, and procedures are listed in the city website. Remarks will be limited to a total of 3 minutes per person. Please email your name to Gio Calderon at g.calderon@ci.alpine.tx.us. If you have a petition or other information pertaining to your subject, please email it to the city secretary beforehand. All names wanting to make public comments for the meeting will be queued up and given to the mayor at the section of the meeting. The mayor will call on those individuals one at a time, and our meeting moderator will take you off mute to make your comments. This will function the same as our existing sign-in sheet at City Council. Please note, you must include your full name, first and last, along with what ward you reside in or have business interest in. If you do not live or own property in the City of Alpine, please state that in your email. State law generally prohibits the council from discussing or taking any action on any issue not included on the agenda. But if appropriate, the council may schedule a topic for future discussion or matter to staff. No attacks on council members or city staff will be allowed. The mayor and or city council members may call a point of order to stop. If an individual continues to personally attack an elected official or staff member in a meeting, they may be barred. Now call this meeting to order. City Secretary, do we have a quorum?
Mayor, we do have a quorum, and the notice was posted on November 24th, 2020 at 5 p.m.
Okay, we'll stand up and have the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
To
of
the
the
flag
United States of America,
of
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under
one
God,
nation, under
indivisible,
God,
with liberty and
liberty
justice.
and justice for all.
Texas pledge.
Under the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
Thank you all very much. We don't, any public comments?
Yes, Mayor, we did have one public comment that came in, and I committed or volunteered to read it.
Okay, that's the one at the hut.
Yes, sir. So let me just go ahead and read his comments. It's from Mr. Alan Benoit. My wife Kelly and I run the Cow Dog food truck in Alpine and have done so for nearly 12 years. The present pandemic situation has been difficult for us, and I'm certain it is for all Alpine businesses. One of our biggest challenges has been opening our business every week, knowing we are doing the safest, most responsible things we can for our patrons. We look at all the sources, analyze all the numbers, compare notes with other businesses in an effort to plan our course of action for the week. This has proven difficult, and we cannot find a cohesive source for this information. This note comes as a plea to those empowered to assemble and make available a package of information and guidelines updated frequently to help us and other businesses plan for safe and responsible ways to carry on with confidence in this difficult time. I know that enforcement is a gray area concerning such guidelines. Nevertheless, I believe a well-informed public is bound to be safer and a more responsible public. Thanks to all, Alan Benoit.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Okay, we don't have any presentations or recognitions. Yes.
We do have one other public comment request from a Mr. Mike Green, and if he'll just unmute himself, he can make his comment.
Okay. Mr. Green,
Yes.
okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and council members, for allowing me to speak. I'd like to voice my support for the measure under consideration tonight to lower the speed limit from 30 to 20 miles an hour within the city limits. I have some safety concerns. I own a home on Gallego Street. And over the last couple of years, we've noticed an uptick in speeders. And in that area between 7th and 1st Street, it's rated at 20 miles per hour speed limit. And oftentimes we observe motorists exceeding that by twice. And so we're very concerned about the speeders. And we'd like to, we're definitely in support of lowering it throughout town, but it has to be enforced. We need to write tickets. There needs to be consequences. And I think citizens will understand better when things have changed if the tickets are being written. So I just wanted to express my concerns. I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your comments, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, any more? Gio,
No, that would be all for tonight.
that would be all. Okay, we have no presentations and we'll go to reports and at City Mayor's report. And my report deals with a voter turnout of back in November the 3rd. To me, I think it was a record turnout. I know citywide, there was like 1,418 votes cast, and I'm going by what was cast in my, for me, and I had no opponent. And I don't know how Chris prevailed in her district or Martine, but I think it was a great turnout. It's unfortunate that we can't have it coincide with a national election. Maybe we get more voters to turn out because in the past few years, the turnout has been pretty dismal for city. But I want to thank all to come out and put forth the effort in voice to the city for that. We'll go out to city attorney report. We have none. City manager.
Mayor, I really appreciate the comment about voter turnout. Just to help make sure everyone's clear, we are not allowed to change the voting date unless we change the charter, which requires a citywide approval. The charter requires that the city elections occur in May of each year. So just a piece of information.
Right, I understand that. Okay, city manager.
Yes, sir. Honorable Mayor and City Council, we've got a full deck of slides. Abel's going to screen share for us as we go through our presentation. Actually, will be the other one.
Maybe he's not.
Yeah, you just have to stop the screen sharing and start it again. There you go. Perfect. All right. So the first slide is actually a fun slide to talk about. This is our photo contest winner for this year, none other than Miss Leslie Mendoza, who works for Eddie. She's city employed. One of the things I want to share with everybody, I mean, not only is this a beautiful photo, and we do these photo contests every year, it's a great way to build a repository of photos, but it is a blind judging. So our judge does not know the names of the people. He's simply given a number and then reviews all the photos. And so we're super proud of Leslie. So anyway, for all's enjoyment. Next slide, please. Actually, go down 2 of them for me, Abel. There we go. So relative to where we're at from a COVID perspective, you know, we've been looking at these similar charts every other week. I think those that are looking nationally also see where the case counts are going up across the nation, but we're going to specifically look at Texas here. And as you'll see on the daily reported new cases chart on the left, that has continued to climb over the last month and a half. And then the daily reported deaths, which is on the right, that particular slide. And let me, sorry, I want to do a little adjustment on the screen here. We've also adjusted our technology a little bit in the Civic Center. So Abel and I are working together on this evening. But if you look at the daily reported deaths, we saw that starting to trend up a little bit. Last couple of days, we've seen a little trend down. Obviously, we want to see that continue to trend back down. Next slide for me, Abel. This was a new set of charts that came out of the New York Times. I started sharing, and that's really looking at the reported specimens tested, as well as hospitalizations. I think the testing is critical because part of the feedback that we're receiving here in City Hall has been, how do we ensure that we're getting more and more robust testing? The availability is there. We know on that last test in November that the National Guard was not going to be performing tests in this area. And so we've got some plans in place to continue on with our localized free testing that's been occurring. And I'll talk about that here shortly. But then also hospitalizations are something we certainly track at a state level, but more assertively address here locally. Next slide. This is a combination of two charts presented on the New York Times, but I think are important for us to ensure we're grounded in, and that is that left portion of Texas where we are at in far west Texas is really per capita the most intensive positive testing going on, or positive tests infection rate in the state. Interesting enough, on the New York Times site this morning, we were the #1 listed county on there. You see us at the top. And that's reflective of, the last week where we've grown from, 150 active cases to 415 as of this morning.
City Manager, can that be attributed to the fact that we're testing more often?
Well, that is a portion of it. The fact that we are testing more often, but the other portion is we do have more positive cases per capita that have popped up. After school started, the weather started getting a little cool. People were, really more inside, and through some of that inside behavior, I think, one of the locations in town was a local watering hole establishment. We had quite a bit of spread that was identified there as well. So next slide, please. Of course, the 5 metrics we're looking at are hospital occupancy, the reproduction rate, the infections, and the positivity rate. So next slide. And I think this will further answer your question, Mayor. Our infection rate, that 1.7, that means for every one person that's showing positive, they're basically spreading it to 1.7 people. Our goal is to keep that below 1. If you remember, 2 meetings ago, we were close to 1, and then we popped up to 1.3, 1.4, and now we're up to 1.7. So that's real indicative of the spread that's going on right now. Positive test rate. So as we've done more testing, you're right, Mayor, that's going to reflect more positive cases, but also the positive test rate from 2 meetings ago was sitting around 5 to 7%, and now that's up to 29%. And so more people that are being tested are testing positive. Now, the bright spot in this chart is our ICU headroom used. So we're still below 30% there. What that means is, how's our hospital doing compared to what their capacity is? We know right now there's 5 COVID cases in the hospital. There's 25 beds available. They could expand to 50. So Rick Flores and team at the hospital have not been inundated with a tremendous amount of COVID cases. And that really is kind of the crux of what we're seeing in the last week is case counts, active case counts go from 150 to 400, hospitalizations go from 7 to 5. So you would have expected that those to trend in the same direction, not trend in an opposite direction. Now, I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a doctor by trade, but I certainly do, you know, in support of the city and just support of being a person, you know, I'm combing through the data and looking at what's out there. And it does demonstrate that there are more remedies out there. Doctors are using treatments, and also people are, you know, if they do get sick with COVID, they are tending to do more of the right things about resting, isolating, and that is helpful from them not having to go into the hospital. Now, that being said, one of the things that Mr. Benoit talked about in his letter, and we talked about at our CV team call this morning, which the mayor attended, the chief attended, was how do we get a better amount of information out to the public? Certainly, we're focused on Alpine, but we're also concerned about the greater region because they all feed into our local hospital too. And one of the concerns I think that Mr. Benoit hit on, that many others in the community have stated, is how can we get a more robust set of information out there so that we can make better decisions on whether we want to stay open or whether we want to close, which is each individual business's right, but they want to be able to make it with better information. So post our meeting at 11 this morning, a few of us got back together at 2 this afternoon and put together a plan to start getting out bi-weekly a synopsis of what's going on within each group in Alpine. So when we think about the school district, when we think about the university, when we think about the county, when we think about the city, when we think about the hospital, when we think about our EMC, each group will be pulling together 3 to 4 to 5 bullet points about key strategies that they're working on, key concerns. So from the city perspective, our report may look like, you know, all of our city offices are open, we're temperature checking, our city staffs are working at full capacity, and really give some real clear, specific information out to the community. This will come out twice a week so that business owners and other individuals who are paying closer attention to Alpine and Brewster County will have that information so that you know, hopefully we calm some level of the fear, but also open up the door for more dialogue. And in that bi-weekly report that will go out, we'll also, from the EMC perspective, address the upcoming testing and what we're focused on ensuring getting done there. Chief Martin is working back with Stephanie Elmore, EMC, to ensure that we've got testers here that can help facilitate the taking of the tests. She buys them in batches of 500. So then that's really kind of a good allotment. If you think about our last 2 rounds of testing, we've done close to 500 here locally on each of those. So she's pulling together testing for next week. Once we get the firm dates on that, we'll get that out on our website like we've done. But the goal is to maintain this level of consistency with the testing here in Alpine.
And I hope that staff and council members do take advantage of this free testing. You know, it just, I think it's crucial, you know, we're talking about it and asking people to do their part. I think we all need to do our part also in getting those tests and letting people know that, you know, we are participating in this 100%.
Chris?
I used the last testing, got results back in 2.5 days. It's
Yeah,
negative, so.
it doesn't take long. I mean, it's like 48 hours.
Chris?
I have a question. Do we have an emergency management person within the city? I see that we're.
I can't hear.
I was asking if we have an emergency management person within the city. I see that we rely a lot on Stephanie Elmore with the county. I was just wondering if the city has any.
Right, so we don't have a paid staff member. We've historically, Chief Martin and I have worked on the administrative side. Interesting enough, the mayor and I were talking earlier today, and he and I are going to get together on Monday to look, review the emergency management ordinance that the city has in place. It's actually an appendix. And go through, we've got to do a couple things. Number one, update the plan, and then look at any implications from this year's COVID pandemic. And then two, look at personnel, who's appointed, how do we best manage that moving forward? So good question. That's, the mayor and I will start working on that. He is, you know, from a state perspective, the mayor is typically listed as your emergency management position by, you know, by state law. And then in the city, in our charter, in our book of ordinances, we do have that position listed out. So we'll start working on that, bring that back to council in January.
Do you have any type of management plan there at this time?
Hey, Mayor, that was a question for you.
Okay, I can't hear her at all.
Do you have an emergency management plan at this time?
Chris, you're way off in the distance.
Yes, sir. Do you
Yes, oh, there
have-
you go.
do
Go
you
ahead.
Do you have an emergency management plan at this time?
We're going with what we started back in September, coordinating it with the county judge, myself, Eric, the chief, the sheriff's department. We all have one game plan in mind, and that's a consensus that we're sticking to, and also adhering to the governor's orders. Because what we put in place back in September, the governor overruled everyone in the state, so now we have to follow his guidelines.
We're going to sit down and start working on that, refining that existing plan that's in place. You know, I think one of the other pieces that we started on from a city perspective back in August was this workshop where we brought in all the different law enforcement entities, because ideally what we need to have happen too is maybe not quarterly, but at least twice a year, bringing the groups together for an exercise that looks at some level of emergency within the greater community and how we're going to react to that, who's in each role. And so we've got to get that started as a process. Now, we also will need, specifically the county, but also the other law enforcement entities to be engaged. And certainly typically in a smaller community, our law enforcement would be heavily engaged with the emergency management. So the mayor and I, as we were kind of going through the CBT meeting, had the conversation today that we needed to ensure that this started. Good. Yep. All right. Of course, this next slide is the county slide that comes out every day. That will continue to come out daily to complement what we will be putting out by. Next slide. I just wanted to flash up the Sol Ross COVID resource page. If you see that, remember 2 weeks ago, they had about 80 cases, student body, and several more on their faculty and staff. That number's come down. Well, I sent them home too, but they, right. Well, that spike was traced to a single establishment here in town that several students went to, and then went back and spread it to several more students.
Eric, the volume is starting to drop down again.
The volume.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Can you still hear me?
Sounds a little bit better.
Okay. All right. Let me run through the rest of these slides real quick. The independent schools, we know they're back in class this week. One of the items that came up was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when they went to remote learning and the case counts were lower, and then they came back to in-person. This week, the case counts were higher. What was the reason for that? The reason was pretty simple. They've got to have enough teachers able to conduct class in the classroom setting. And 3 weeks ago, they had more than a dozen teachers. They couldn't bring in enough substitutes, so they had to migrate to the remote learning in order to continue on with the classes. This week, they've only got 4 staff members that are either positive or quarantined, so they're able to still have in-school learning. TEA has some state guidelines regarding how many days that they can be in remote learning before they have to come back to in-person. And so Becky is working to manage that. That's part of this bi-weekly report that needs to come out so that the community sees some of those decision-making steps that they're going through. Sol Ross State, of course, they're finishing the semester remote, and they won't be back on campus till late January. From the city perspective, we have had a few more positive tests with employees, primarily field staff. So think law enforcement, utilities. We continue the temperature check in the workplace, make sure folks that aren't well stay home, and continue to communicate with employees about their own temperament, how they're doing, ensuring that they're in that right frame of mind while they're here. So I think the more we communicate, the better, and hence some of the steps that we'll be implementing over the next week. Next slide. Switching gears, and before I close off on COVID, any other questions on COVID? All right. I wanted to plant the seed more than anything on affordable housing. I think from a city perspective, I would like to see us champion this as a topic in 2021. What we're seeing right now is that whether it's the university or it's some of the other business leaders in the community, there is this struggle with recruiting people to come work in Alpine. There are also people that come out here and visit and want to live here and would like to work here. The challenge is they can't match what our wages are here to the ability to find affordable housing. And because of that, we're somewhat at a position where it's going to be hard to grow, whether it's economically or whether it's from a university perspective. I mean, certainly the university wants to fill their dorm rooms, but if they get to 2,400 students, some of those students are going to live off campus. And that creates more of a void for us and a challenge in the community. And it's not really just talking about the volume of units out there, but it's also talking about the quality. And our role as a city through our building services department to make sure we've got good quality housing. One of the pieces I know from 2017 when I left to 2019 when I came back, our rental market exploded. So we went from 14 or 15 short-term rentals up to 70 plus short-term rentals. And those were predominantly long-term rentals that people who own those buildings said, hey, I can make more money in the short-term rental market. So they flipped them over. And the basic, macroeconomic of supply and demand then takes over. That supply goes down. People start pushing their prices up. And one of the things that I asked Keela to start building for us this last week, and if you look at this next slide, it's really a chart. Now, this is only a portion of what she's built so far, but I've asked her to really look at all of the different rental opportunities that are out there, whether it's single family homes, whether it's apartments, whether it's RV spaces that people are bringing in a fifth wheel and living. I mean, believe it or not, we've got a lot of folks that are, and we've got an employee here at City Hall, and the affordable housing for her and her husband is a fifth wheel out at an RV home. And so we're trying to really look across each of these different segments. So single family home, apartments, RV parks, and better understand what the pricing looks like out there. And then we've got to start thinking about what are our jobs that are available here. And I know Councilor Stevens has brought this up a few times that if you go to like a website like Indeed or some of those job sourcing sites, you'll see 60, 70, 80 jobs available in Alpine. And we know anecdotally from talking to different business owners that they can't find good, reliable help. So there's a whole lot of jobs in that lower income service-based jobs, anywhere from $9 or $10 an hour up to, 12, 15 an hour. And if you have two wage earners that are making that wage, do you have affordable quality housing that they can go into? And that's really a challenge for us right now. And I visited with Liz Pena over at the Small Business Development Center, and she co-manages this location and the one that they have in Eagle Pass. And she also, it's interesting, had identified this as a problem in Alpine from her perspective. And it's not just about business development, but it's about recruiting and retaining good staff members for those businesses. And so how we start tackling housing. We do know at Lechuguilla, we've got that new development that's getting close to finishing. That's going to provide 47 affordable options out there. My question is, could we get 2 or 3 more of those and fill them up as well? So the problem, it's not a small issue. We're entering 2021, really needing to think about our master plan for the city, how we zone things, where apartments go, where smaller footprint lots might be, and all of these questions that come up and are sensitive points in the community. And we've got to really start working on this and putting that plan in place to help Alpine be successful over the next 20 to 30 years, and do it in a way that makes sense for Alpine, that also pulls in community members that might have a real interest in helping develop out some of these options. Because the other thing I know I'm sensitive to is these fly-by-night developers that come in and they build rickety crickety type stuff. And that's just not what we're looking for. We're looking for good, solid housing plans and programs across the community. And so there's no real action tonight, but I did want to plant the seed, because part of what we're going to start really charging towards in 2021 is that master plan for the city. And then also, what do we do to start recruiting in and developing this interest within some of our business leaders in the community on how to develop out some more affordable quality housing in Alpine. So does that make sense? I'm sure all of you get residents that come to you and say, it's a real struggle here in Alpine. I mean, I have to be honest with you. Sometimes I'll see a mobile home that's for rent for like $1,000 or $1,100. And I think, well, in normal other cities, that unit should only be renting for $550 or $600. And so how we get back to a normal sense of what rental rates should look like, it's got to be, of course. And I think our business community benefits, our people benefit, everybody benefits from making this a priority. Any questions on the affordable housing?
I don't have a question. It's a great topic. So when it comes, we'll have this show.
Okay, thank you. And this is, David and I have already been working on the fact that we've got to get this thing kicked off in 2021. So I think the one action that I would ask for council is to look at your planning and zoning commission members and understand whether they're up for the challenge to work on this or not. And if they're not, that's great. We can find them something else to do in the city, but we need 7 people on planning and zoning that are willing to engage in some real robust discussions on this and help map out what the plan looks like for Alpine, and then also how we start really working through the development side of it too. Okay. All right. Last topic I had on mind was the lighting ordinance. We did have our second workshop the day after our last council meeting. I know Chris attended, Rick attended. We had a really good group of people on Zoom as well participating. And it was interesting going through some of the suggested language changes. It really illuminated, not to poke fun at it, but it really illuminated some of these topics about, some of the general provisions that are in there, suggested changes. Like, for example, one was around flagpoles and having a maximum amount of flagpoles, but doesn't seem to make sense, right? Because we've got multiple residents in town that I know, like Councilor Stevens has 3 flagpoles. And so helping adjust some of that language so that we don't create an ordinance that's overbearing, but instead we create an ordinance that piques people to think about their lighting on their homes and their lighting on their businesses, and how you get better shielding of that lighting to direct the light to the ground. And ultimately, directing that to the ground creates a safer environment. The other benefit is that people that are astronomers or associated with the observatory, they have a darker sky. The other, I think, big topic that came up was, call it the sunset clause. As you put provisions in place, do you force residents to change out their lights at a certain time? So in 5 years, in 7 years, and in 10 years. And does that make sense from an Alpine perspective? I think we can all take a step to the side and say, new construction and remodel, if you're putting up new light fixtures, they should all comply with a dark sky lighting standard that we set with the amount of Kelvin and the lumens and whatnot. But when you take a person who's maybe on a fixed income that has a home that has 4 lights on the perimeter, and now you're telling them 5 years down the road, you have to change out these light fixtures, and it's going to be $100 or $125 a piece, and they're looking at it saying, through life, I never fixed anything that wasn't broke, right? So now you're wanting me to fix something that wasn't broke. And I think that's a real topic that from a city, we've got to come to understanding with. Do you want to push that sunset clause, or do you want to look at it from the perspective of, do we go out and seek grants? Do we have community volunteer groups that come together and say, hey, those that can't change, we will help facilitate that change. And so I think we really dived into some of that topic at this last workshop, which was healthy, and it really paves the way for the third workshop. The other piece that's out there certainly is our ball fields. When we think about Coconut Field, we think about Jackson Field, we think about Buck Stadium. All of those are government owned in our city parks. These are government owned facilities. So to go in there, if they're not dark sky compliant, to force a change with that, we may not be budgeting it from a city perspective. And so once again, how do we look at maybe some grant programs out there that offset or facilitate? And so that's another piece of the puzzle that we still have to navigate through. But wanted to give everybody an update on that. Chris and Rick, I know you were both there, wanted to share anything as well.
I just wanted to thank Councilor Stevens and myself, listening to presentations and office of y'all have a lot of work. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so I thought it was a good engaging meeting. Eric, you hit the high points. You know, one of the things we're gonna have to get in our vocabulary is 2,700 Kelvin lights. So that's kind of the light fixture, in terms of that's the color of light. So lights are measured in Kelvin. When you go into Morrison's or anywhere else, you see, you know, cool lights, which are in the 5,000 to 6,000. What you want to buy is the warm lights. Those are 2,700 Kelvin. There aren't any 2,700 Kelvin light bulbs in Alpine. So that's part of what we have to work with is, you know, work with Bob over at Bob Ward over at Morrison's, and working with folks out at McCoy and Roberts to make sure they get those right colors in, so that we can apply as we think about going forward. I think the sunset clause is going to be an interesting discussion to be able to have, because we got lots of lights going on, and how do we help motivate people to head in that direction? And then, you know, there's lots of things to work through. I do think that it's easy for new construction remodels. It's the stuff that we already have is going to be an important part of the discussion. And look forward to everyone engaging in January. The intent was, you know, working with the community members who brought this forward to work through the workshops prior to it coming to council. No doubt there'll be some issues we and the council have to work our way through and get input from community members. I think it's come a long ways, but still got a long ways to go.
But, you know, like a lot of these ordinances for the city, it's not just we get together one time and make the adjustments. We really have to be thoughtful and read through the sections and think about the impacts on the citizens. And we certainly, my sense is, leadership in Alpine has never wanted to be far overreaching, but rather, you know, put things together that make sense. But also keep some of these items in mind, because you can have a balance there. And so I've been pleased with these discussions. All right, Abel, I think, yeah, we're now into Megan's world.
Great report, City Manager.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Megan.
Hey, Megan. Howdy.
Next slide, please. So doing things a little bit different, always staying on top of things, keeping you guys on your toes. So this is just a basic summary of where we're at as of November 30th. So this would be the second month of this fiscal year. We should be at comparably 16.67% of our budget. So I broke it down for all of our major funds. General, water, wastewater, sanitation, airport, hotel occupancy, gas, and interest in sinking. So the first section, as you can see, is our revenue. We're doing fairly well. Hotel is to be as expected. There's a slightly unique for the new people on council. Our payments for occupancy tax are received monthly or quarterly. So every quarter, our revenue will spike for all the hotels that are paying quarterly. And it's fairly low in between for the months that we only get the monthly payments. And those are usually the smaller ones. Our gas utility, of course, as we get into the colder months, I hope everyone has their heaters on tonight. Will start to increase and then slowly decrease as we get back into the warmer months. Our expenses are pretty much in line. As you can see, the general fund is almost at 16.67%, 1% off. Wastewater sanitation is about 10%, airport 10%, hotel occupancy is about 10%, 9.31 to be exact. Gas is at 9.45. And of course, we haven't made any of our debt payments this year. Those don't go out until the February timeframe. So we're at 0%. Next slide. My main focus, one of my goals for myself this year is to get a really good cash flow for the city so that we can keep our checking counts to a minimum and actually put that into operating reserves. So this would be the cash flow for the past 4 years or 3 years and 2 months. As you can see, during the November to end of January, February timeframe, that's when we spike the most. That is our property taxes coming in. We get those letters out in October, and then, of course, the payment before penalties is the end of February. So that's when the general fund typically brings in all of their money. This one little spike, in the June time period, May-June time period of last year, that's when we made all of our big transitions with the paving projects, and money was moved from the gas department into reserve accounts, and that's all recorded through the general fund. So that's kind of the discrepancy in that one. Next slide, please. So here are our sales tax revenues for the past 3 years and 2 months. As you can see, they're pretty steady. We do increase a little bit last year in the December time period. And then in our May time period, we also increase. Real consistent, not too much of an explanation as why maybe we don't increase more in the summer, winter kind of deal. They're pretty consistent. The next slide, please.
Yeah, and Megan, just to note on that sales tax revenue, I appreciate you having that chart up there, because that's something we were concerned about middle of last year with the impacts of COVID and some of the shutdowns. But I think as everybody sees, we comfortably exceeded in last fiscal year what we had done the year before. And I think we're on track to continue in that pace. So that's a good thing. So thank you, Megan.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Eric. I think more people are shopping at home, and that's definitely apparent in our chart. Ad valorem taxes, the same as our revenue. You'll see the spike go up from November to the February timeframe. That's, of course, when all the payments are being made. And then, of course, it slowly decreases, and then we'll start back up, of course, in the next fiscal year. Next slide. These are our general fund expenditures. So some consistency, but not a lot. The big spike, of course, last year, this is our paving project when we brought in Jarrett Dirt Work. So that's one of our bigger payments. The spikes are usually around our paving season when we're buying material, the more expensive items that come out of our general fund. The big spike at the beginning of this year is the continuation of the paving project. The Jarrett Dirt Work group, the project was for 2 fiscal years, last fiscal year and this fiscal year. So we've already made one large payment to them this year for some of their work that they've done. Next slide. So this is our utility for water, wastewater, and sanitation. So it's pretty consistent. The huge difference from the 18, the huge spike and then drop, that was actually a billing error with Sul Ross State University. They have a couple multiple water meters and the wrong one was being read. So the huge spike is overbilling them and then of course correcting it to bill them correctly. So that's where you see that being recorded. Otherwise fairly consistent. It does start to slightly increase. If you'll notice during the warmer months when people are watering more, filling up their swimming pools, and then slightly decreases. We do have a bit of an oddball this year with it being a tad bit warmer into the October, November timeframe. There was additional water usage. So you'll notice that we've actually increased, whereas before we've decreased. Next slide. So this would be the utilities expenditures. There is no no consistency, no pattern really. I like to say the high spikes are the emergencies and the low spikes are we're doing good. So really no real consistency. It's really hard to kind of go through and tell you where we were at with different things. There are a couple things I can point out. Some of the months where there are slightly higher payments. That's typically when we've had to pay TDS twice. That is the largest expense out of this fund besides big infrastructure projects and the wastewater plant updates. So that's some of the higher months.
Yeah, hey, Megan, and I would add into that I think part of what we try to do to stabilize, number one, the wastewater treatment plant, but also stabilize the SCADA system out there has driven some of the fluctuations. And we'll talk about some of those strategies that Scott and I have been working on relative to the water a little later in the meeting when we get to the utility billing ordinance, but that's part of what we've got to do to get a little smoother representation year in and year out where our expenses are.
Yes, I totally agree. I do want to point out one thing on the utilities expenditures. November's not listed. I tried to get as much information in as possible. Yesterday was the last day of the November timeframe. So typically we like to reconcile and go back and audit the month. So we did have some discrepancies and I wanted to get those cleaned up before I put in numbers so that it would be more accurate. So on the next spreadsheet or chart, you'll get to see November's. So the gas utility, obviously you can tell as we get into our colder months, the revenue does go up and then it slightly decreases until, of course, the next go around where it goes back up in the colder months again. So it's got a very distinctive pattern. We had expected that, but now it's a nice, good visual for you guys to see. Next. So the expenditures, these are pretty steady as well. The spikes are typically when the gas department is working on their, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it's their DIMP plan where they have to go in and replace so many feet of infrastructure.
Yes,
So
that's the, yeah.
So this is when they're buying their material to be able to go in and start replacing. The really large increase is when the council approved moving the funds from the gas department, the reserves, into the paving project reserves. So that's recorded as an expense and that's the huge spike for that 1 month. So that is not typical. So that's an explainable difference. Some of the other spikes are also due from year to year. The franchise administrative fees have either been paid monthly or quarterly. So you'll see some of the spikes on the quarter months as that comes in. This year we're doing everything monthly and moving forward everything monthly. That way all the departments, after speaking with Eric, can actually see that money coming in and out of their budgets. Next. So this is the hotel occupancy tax. As you can tell, we haven't brought in very much so far this year, but most of our payments are recorded for quarterly. That's when a lot of the funds do come in. If you'll notice that The revenue, which is the red, has exceeded our expenditures for the past 3 years. So that's where the reserve has built up. That's going to allow council to move forward with this year, depending on where they're at with their revenues and the additional costs that council approves for additional events or advertising or things just to promote the city in general. Next slide. This is our airport. So airport is a little bit different. We have exceeded the revenue side. Our expenditures have been slightly higher. In 18-19 timeframe, council had actually, let me correct myself, in 2017, council approved the $3 million project. So the funds did have to come out to pay for that, a little over $300,000. The majority of it coming from other accounts to help the airport. But the expenditures are recorded in the appropriate fund, which would be the airport. There is one correction for fiscal year 2021. We have actually brought in a little less. It says 90,000, but 22,500 of that was recorded for this year, which was actually a receivable for last year. That was our portion of the USDA grant. We finally did receive that money. So it has been reallocated to last year as a receivable. So this chart will also slightly change. Next is our interest in sinking. We're doing great. The city, since I've been with them, has been able to pay all of their debt payments in a timely manner without having to move funds around. I'm super excited about that. We've already started getting our tax payments in. We've brought in a little over 16,000 so far this year. This is an interest in sinking account, so it is secured for just our debt. It can't be utilized for anything else. So one of the things that we do get that little extra push on would be the interest we collect off of the deposits. So every year we will probably gain a little bit extra that down the road when the city decides to go back out for debt, we have that little bit of a cushion for our first payment. And our last slide, this is actually the fourth quarter investment report from last fiscal year. We didn't have any big changes at the end of the last 3 months. This will slightly change as far as the allocated money. Council had approved in prior years the allocation, but because we've had too much money in our checking accounts, which yes, it's a good thing, don't get me wrong, it's hard to move money back in and making sure that we meet our requirements to have it collateralized. So at some point in the next 3 months, we'll be going back before council with a new game plan, a new investment strategy. Eric and I will be discussing that. That way we can secure our funds and also start some operating reserve accounts as well. Any questions? I speak kind of fast, I apologize.
Anything exciting on the city?
Well, they're just going through they've got the Antrim girl, you know, with the.
All right, thank you, Megan. Marcy.
Thank you, Megan.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you guys see and hear me okay? And the slide?
Yes.
Ma'am.
Okay. Well, to the new council members that I have not met yet, hello, my name is Marcy Tuck and I am the grant writer for the city. I started in January of 2020. And so this is my first pretty much full year recap of the city grants and how we have done this calendar year. So this goes, you know, kind of opposite of all of Megan's fiscal year's discussion prior to, but this is a calendar year recap of the grants, the grant performance for the city. So next slide, please. I only have 3 slides, so forgive me if I'm actually reading them, but I do want to point out that in your council packet, I included a 3 or 4 page spreadsheet that has a lot more detail about each of these, and I'm very willing to take questions on any of that, my presentation or what's in the packet. So this is a great slide. This is our win. So funds awarded in calendar year 2020 was $1,500,050 and change. So that's amazing. And all for only $144,000 of the city's contribution, which is the little note at the bottom there. So that's, if you're into return on investments, that's about a $975 return on investment. That's a lot of other people's money, Councilman Stevens, woo. So the projects that were funded with this 1.5 million so far in calendar year 2020, I am just going to read them because they're highlights anyway, are 2 full-time HIDA officers, 1 full-time coordinator, HIDA coordinator, additional fire hydrants in South Alpine. That was finishing off a grant from a previous year, but it did still touch into calendar year 2020. 14 body armor suits for the Alpine Police Department, 14 body cameras for the Alpine Police Department, overtime hours for APD, $2,000 towards hiring 2 new officers for APD, a new Kubota mower for the airport, reimbursements of COVID efforts that the city had to, was not expecting to incur this year. Nobody was, but we are getting reimbursements from the federal government through the state for a lot of those efforts listed there. Airport funds that were sort of emergency funds granted to the airport, the federal government realizing that not many people were flying or traveling over the course of this year. And then the airport lighting project, which is done through Texas Department of Transportation, their aviation department. So those are all of the things that we have gotten as a city for approximately $1.5 million worth of awards for only $144,000 worth of city money. So next slide. Okay, there are still 3 grant applications pending right now that if fully awarded would total $285,000. We submitted a grant to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department for the full development of Pueblo Nuevo Park in Ward 4. That was submitted in early November. And that is a 50% match with the city. We are also, actually this grant deadline was, so the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or the BRIC grant, the second item on the slide. This is for hazard mitigation planning efforts. And it's not duplicative of the hazard planning that Eric was speaking of earlier. This is more in line with what the Regional Council of Governments does. It's Brewster County and the city of Alpine get together and produce a multi-hazard mitigation action plan every 5 years. And we are submitting a grant for funds to help supplement that would focus on city jurisdictional items like code and zoning, and drought management plan, or drought contingency plan, excuse me. It says submitted today, but they've actually extended their deadline to the 7th. And so Megan and I decided to wait on it a couple more days to go over it more thoroughly, but it will be submitted post haste by the end of the week. And then the last one that will be submitted in a couple of weeks that I feel still needs to be on the pending list is through the Department of Agriculture, Texas Department of Agriculture. It's called the Go Texan Grant. And while a small grant of only $5,000, it actually goes towards tourism and promotion of the midweek mercantile and music events that we would have coming up in 2021. So those are all still pending. Can't claim them as victories yet. They're still pending, but they did happen or will happen in calendar year 2020. Okay, last slide. And so now we're going to look ahead at the next calendar year. And with grants, they do seem to come in waves in terms of deadlines. And so looking ahead, there's another Texas Parks and Wildlife grant for trails, and that one is due at the beginning of February. There is a Texas Water Development Board grant, Rural Water Assistance Fund, that Environmental Services and the Utilities Department is really spearheading, but I would be helping with that. That one's due in the March timeframe. And then there are numerous Office of the Governor and U.S. Department of Justice grants where the police department can get more of what they need in terms of equipment, et cetera. And those are also due in the March timeframe. There is a National Park Service grant for technical and planning assistance that is in line actually with the work that we would be submitting for the Texas Water Development Board grant. That is on a project in the Poets Grove area for reclaiming non-potent wastewater to use to, water the golf course and the springs that are there naturally historically. Anyway, so that's an opportunity. FEMA has an assistance to firefighters grant for vehicle acquisition. So that is on our radar. And we are also looking at 2 different CDBG grants. One is their biannual or 2 fiscal year grant cycle. The last one was getting the new fire hydrant infrastructure in the south side of Alpine. And so the next round is coming up in 2021 and is due in the May timeframe. And then we have, again, the CDBG Downtown Revitalization Grant that we could reapply for in June of next year. And that's really only the first half of next year. So there's always a grant deadline coming up. And I'm happy to say that we're actually getting, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck as a city in terms of other people's money with city matching funds. So next slide, last slide. Are there any questions? I feel like I talked kind of fast as well, so yeah. Sorry.
You're doing a great job, Marcy, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's use everybody else's money other than ours.
All right, thanks, Marcy.
You're welcome.
Mr. Eddie.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. Well, we're at the end of our paving season for this year. Even though we had a 3 weeks setback with our weather spell we had there in July and of course COVID. We're gonna show you some slides like we did the last time, just to let you guys know pretty much where we did our last paving for the season. So you want to go to the next slide, please. So these are pretty much on the, as you can see there on Stockton, we were in that area, pretty much over there on that ward, Marfa, West Stockton, West Sanderson. Next slide, please. Again, more streets that we did in that area. Over there on Hendricks, June in that area, Fort Davis, Hanson as well. Next slide, please. And this is West Brown, between the middle school and of course 16th Street. Next slide. This is West Stockton, of course, and West Fort Davis. West Anderson between Middle School Drive. West Del Rio. These streets over here on West Del Rio and Sherry Street are pretty wide streets. They're actually 40 feet wide streets, which it took a little bit more time, but next slide, please.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you?
This street over here is on Peach Landing. This is actually one of the only blocks that we actually full reconstructed, remove excess material, of course, haul our base in, compact material, primed it with MS2, and then we paid it with, of course, our CRS2. That's why that aggregate you see there is that white gravel, because we're going to come back next year and seal coat it. Next slide. Okay, so this is a map of actually of all the streets we've done since 2006 all the way to 2020. As you can see, most of the paving, we tried to do most of the wards. We're probably going to start with Ward 2, 4, and 5 next year, just to kind of like do all the wards, have equal paving on all the wards. So that's pretty much to give you an idea. We used to average like anywhere from 35 to 45 blocks, but that was full reconstruction. When we seal coated, we kind of averaged maybe like 40 to 50 blocks. But again, that's just to give you guys an idea of what we did this year, where we're at, and where we want to start next year. Next slide. So our goals for next year is hopefully get an early start in March, get some streets ready, March, April. That way we can, come May, we can at least have anywhere from 20 to 40 blocks ready, and we can pave those right off the bat. And another thing we're looking at is maybe stop paving in September or maybe even August, and just use September and October to fog seal. I think it's very important that we start fog sealing. It will give our streets more thickness in the pavement, increase durability. Unfortunately, we haven't done that before, and I think that's one of the things that I want to get into. Maybe, you know, it's too late now for us to do any fog sealing since we don't have a heater tank. Because most of the people right now, TxDOT and everybody else, that's basically what they're doing right now, is seal coating. So I think that's something that's very important, that we need to start doing fog sealing our streets. Like this year we had 102 blocks. It would have been nice to actually fog seal all those blocks. You're supposed to fog your streets at least 60 days after your seal coat or pave. So I think that's something that we need to start doing for next year. Next slide. So that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Yeah, Eddie, I'm a little ignorant. What's fog sealing?
Fog sealing is actually, it's an MS2 emulsion. I mean, yeah, it's MS2 emulsion oil, which you dilute it to 7.4, which means like 400 gallons of MS2 to 700 gallons of water. So you want to fog seal, you actually go and spray that over your what you just paved, maybe at a rate of 1.05, just to like fog seal. So that oil is going to actually, you're going to penetrate in the aggregate that you already just laid down. So basically you're increasing the life of your street, that you have a new street. So you started off with a primer, which is an MS2 as well. And then you seal coated or pave with CRS2, and then you're fog sealing with an MS2 again. So actually you're getting 3 coats of asphalt on your streets. And again, it'll give you more thickness to the street and more durability. So it'll actually, you're sealing what you just seal coated. So you're getting 2 seals in one, basically, especially for the winter time. It'll help your street, you know, so it won't crack. You will have better traction. It won't track and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Eddie?
No questions, just a comment, the same as everyone else's. Great job, Eddie, and to the team.
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
our streets are looking super. I won't need shocks for another couple of years, I guess. Okay, let's go with public hearings. We have none. Consent agenda, minutes, financial reports, department written reports, board appointments, notice to the public. The following items are of routine and administrative nature. The council has been furnished with background supporting material on each item, and or it has been discussed at a previous meeting. All items will be acted upon by one vote without being discussed separately unless requested by a council member. in which event the item or items will immediately be withdrawn for individual consideration in its normal sequence. And after items not requiring separate discussion have been on. Items will be a one vote. City Manager.
Mayor, on the consent agenda, we do have one item this evening. We are going to need to move it to number 9 because there is a change we're going to have to make on those minutes. So we'll
Okay,
do
so-
it after the information discussion, if you're okay with that.
Okay, so we'll move it over to item number 9 then.
Yes, sir.
Okay, not a problem. And let's go on to the information or discussion items. And we'll start with Mr. Zimmer again.
Well, Mayor, City Council, our first item tonight to talk about is our short-term rentals. And I know I alluded to it a little bit earlier relative to housing, but what we're really looking at this evening is a discussion that had started early in the year, the January, February timeframe. We had brought the first version of the ordinance to council shortly after COVID started. And through some different dialogue at the council meetings, we had some robust feedback from some of the proprietors in town. We took a step back on the actual ordinance. In your packets this evening, the first page that was included there were really those kind of main points of controversy that grew out of those discussions. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight those this evening. One was the operators felt the inspection side of things was somewhat invasive. Those that use Airbnb as a primary platform, there's certain things that you have to self-certify through the Airbnb program. And from a city perspective, talking to David Hale, myself, part of what the idea was on the inspection was to ensure that these units that were being operated as a business in the community were meeting the standard building code. And so that was something that David and I certainly felt was reasonable. Councilor Stevens, of course, we have the notes that it asked about some self-certification. The International Building Code has some stipulations. The other thing that we kind of looked at from the city perspective too, the fee itself was a $100 annual fee that would give that annual inspection, which also gives them some level of peace of mind that those health and safety items relative to building code are being met. So it's really that balance between you have that inspection. The next topic that had come up was relative to insurance. I think the question is really not around whether it should be required, but what's that specific amount. The city attorney was asked his opinion on it, and the suggestion was really to require that a policy be put on the commercial property without stipulating a specific amount. I thought that was a good compromise myself, but we certainly wanted to open that piece up for discussion as well. The next piece was around timing, and certainly COVID this year, early on when hotels, motels, short-term rentals were reduced to critical service only type traffic, there was heavy concern that people's revenues were down. So we were invoking fee and some requirements that wasn't overly well received. I think what we've seen in the community is after people started traveling again, Alpine became a place that people really liked to come to because it was away from the big city. They could have some reprieve. And certainly talking to many of the Airbnb folks, as well as others, just general view across town, we saw that tourism picked back up through the summer months. And then, the other piece was around fees themselves. And do you charge $100 annual license fee versus, our current protocol was a $350 conditional use permit, which is a city we weren't administrating to. We were simply allowing people to operate the short-term rentals, and we weren't going at them and citing them for not having a conditional use permit. Administratively, that's that balance you're trying to strike as we're working through creating an ordinance overall. In the general tenet of the ordinance also took into effect that we wanted to know who was operating short-term rentals in town. We were sending out notices to folks, and many of them were not responding. We got up over about 50-60% that did respond and come in and register and start paying their hotel occupancy tax. And so one of the ideas certainly with the ordinance is minimizing the fee from what was there before on the $350 conditional use permit to $100 annual license fee. But then also through an ordinance calling that out, if somebody is operating a short-term rental without getting that license, then we could cite them for operating the business without proper licensing in the city. We're not wanting to go out and just write a whole bunch of tickets, but what we do think is important is an understanding that people are getting business by the work that we're doing for marketing Alpine and the travel and tourism, and that they are required to pay that hotel occupancy tax. And that is a requirement by state law, and they should honor that. And so having an ordinance that specifically calls that licensing requirement out in the city, in my perspective, is good practice. The other piece that we talked about was relative, or the last piece was relative to parking. And this one was one that had several points of confusion on it, commercial versus residential. Did we really have a problem or not? I think when we looked at the commercial side of things, the businesses downtown that were raising some concerns, there wasn't anything in the new ordinance that caused them to have to go buy or create new parking. The idea around the parking piece of this was stacking primarily along the residential areas where somebody might have a small unit in the back of their property and no off-street parking. So people would then come to use a short-term rental and have to park on the street versus having off-street parking. So that was the general thought around this portion of the ordinance. Certainly if you're trying to develop a larger book of short-term rentals in more of the downtown area, or even outside, I mean, you always want to have parking for your guests. That seems to be something when people are coming in to visit or use your facility, that they want to have clear delineated parking. And so that was part of what we were trying to call out. And it just simply gives some clear and enforceable standard to apply if the use to occur. So if you had somebody with multiple units on their property, no off-street parking, then you could start creating some congregation along the street in that fashion. So really the purpose of tonight was to get this topic back out of the open, and certainly with Chris and Martine on council now, getting you grounded on where we were trying to go with this, and then be able to kind of gather some feedback so that we can come back to council first of this next year with a good red line ordinance that council is willing to pass if council determines they want to move forward with short-term rental ordinance. That clears mud?
Pretty clear.
Good. I really appreciate the team pulling together that synopsis on the front page, because I think that hits the points effectively. And like I continue to say all along, we're not trying to do this to punish or penalize anybody. And in fact, our existing ordinance does require a higher fee than what we're proposing to do in the licensing on this. But we do want to understand who the operators are, and we do want to make sure that the register, they're paying the hotel occupancy tax, that a couple of these basic standards are being met, like off-street parking and things of that nature.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Do we require businesses in Alpine today to have insurance?
We do not have a specific requirement.
Yeah, so as I think about business operators, they have a responsibility to do things like that. I think, and people are trying to operate this as a business. I don't think it's the city's responsibility to ensure that someone has insurance. So that's my fundamental bias. I mean, and I'm not going to walk through this, but I just don't think it's the city's responsibility. If someone doesn't have insurance, and it's not required by the law, I just don't think that's something the city should enforce. Relative to the inspections, is there a requirement that we inspect the building for business?
Yes, that specifically on to get occupancy, David will inspect, and then the annual fire inspection, which that's why we're going through that work.
It's so my view, again, I just go back to residential versus business. Here people are asking to turn part of a residential into a business, so that'll comply with what we require in a business. And since we require an annual fire inspection of all of our businesses, in my mind, that makes sense. Do we require, so let's say someone owns a building and they lease the building to someone to go run the business. Do we require, separate from the fire inspection, do we require the building owner to get an inspection before they go lease the facility?
They're not required to come to an inspection before they lease the facility.
So I think getting the fire inspection is the thing that comes to my mind. If we're going to go and inspect a home, it's like the lighting ordinance. Unless we go through and understand when things were built with the purpose of the time what the compliance requirements are, I think we're hard pressed to have an enforceable action to say we inspected your place. It's not compliant with the current International Building Code, but it was when it went back built. I think we put ourselves and I think we put a resident in limbo for that. So I am in favor of the annual fire inspection. That's easy. I think the licensing fee for $100. I don't know anyone who objected to $350. That's an easy one. I think there is certainly an opportunity that when we do the final inspection, because that is required, there's the opportunity for David to walk around and say, I wish you, I'd probably follow. But I think if we go beyond that, I think we overstep the bounds of what we're trying to do as a city, which is about safety and recommendations. But anyway, those are the thoughts. Do those make sense?
Yeah, and I think from an inspection perspective, beyond the fire inspection, what we could is structure it in a way that the inspection isn't available.
Yeah.
So that if a short-term rental operator wants to have data to walk through. Yeah. And I think some of them genuinely do.
Yes, some will. Yeah. I think the parking will be an interesting discussion. One, I agree. If someone's going to open a business, they got to have parking for their patrons. I suspect we'll get a lot of pushback on the part of those who want to open up their back casita to short-term rental, but if they haven't got parking, they're my sense is they're putting others at risk. I would say at risk. They're overextending the law using that space and collecting illumination for it. And if they don't have parking, I would say, yeah, you got to get the parking associated. We're going to figure that out. We have to put a driveway and we have to put a parking space, but I do think that's the way. So those are my comments.
Okay, great. Thank you. Grant? Sure.
But I wanted to ask about like the Airbnbs that have their couple on Murphy Street. There isn't parking, but they park on the street. That's when they park businesses were open. They were businesses that got went. And on Holland Avenue, they park hotel on the street. I know there's Airbnb there on Holland. Is there going to be a way that those people can be allowed to have street parking? Or is it just not going to be?
Right, so a lot of those, there were, already cut off and designated what we categorize as off-street parking in the cutouts. What this was really more a focus on was in those residential areas where, like when we think about, when we go down some of the main drags, there's plenty of parking spaces, or I would call them off-street, where they're cutouts. It's not on the actual street. But then you get into the some of the residential neighborhoods where we've got a 26-foot wide street, and then you've got a car parked 4 or 5 feet out into that street. So that's really what we try to identify here.
But I think Maria raises a great point. We may, and I know it's challenging, but there may be different requirements for commercial versus residential. I think that's the point you're raising.
Yeah, when you send me that email, I'll look more specifically at commercial versus residential.
Yeah, and commercial parking, we don't have enough downtown as it is. That's a challenge. To the point, if you own a building, whether you got people who are retail or overnight, that's.
I do know that several of the operators down between like 6th and 7th Street, like Sarah Sibley, she's got several off-street parking next to her. David Lee. Yeah, they've got off-street parking. So yeah, in fact, those were some of the individuals that had brought up the concerns, though. Their places had ample parking. But yeah, I want to look at Murphy Street as well, just to make sure. Right. those do have pull-in parking all along Murphy Street.
That's a really wide street.
Yeah, it gets used for pull-in parking versus if you think about like where Dick and Jean Zimmer are on Second Avenue A, they have off-street parking instead of people parking on Second or parking actually into the street. So, yeah, like Liz Sibley's place, they've got plenty of parking along that front of Murphy Street. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. The next, Mayor, am I okay to go to number 2?
Yes, sir.
All right. The next one is on the coin-operated machine ordinance. And this was in there. David did a nice job. He asked that council consider these updates and changes. And just to put some context on it, we have a lot of people wanting to start gaming operations in town. Dozens of people. And the proposed changes in the ordinance, number 1, raise the application fee from 1,000 to 3,000. And then the second real change is limiting it to 5 operators here in town.
How many are there now?
Well, now we have 3, but we have 7 or 8 applications. And I think about really close to about a dozen that are calling and asking. So we're wanting to ensure that we have the right level of enforcement and oversight on these point operated businesses. And of course, they have to, the machines have to be registered at the state level, certified. And that's something that we will go in, Chief Martin and his team will go in and inspect. So it was section 90-104, that license fee, the recommendation of David was to raise that to 3,000 and then limit the maximum amount to 5.
So we've got more than 5 right now applying. And we've only got 3. How do we go from 3 to 5 if there's 10 people?
The first come, first served.
So you timestamp those requests already?
When they come in. So it's not queued up to make any decisions on tonight, but wanted to get it out there for council to really think about.
City manager, something else that we might consider on that topic is they need to identify themselves as to who they are. They look like little speakeasies with no name other than it says open.
So identification of
Volume has cut out completely.
can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. So when you say identify, is that the signage?
You broke up again.
Okay, or when you say they need to identify, are you talking about signage on their door, signage on their establishment?
On their door, you got porters identifies themselves, Morrison's, all the business locales in town identify themselves. just have the thing open. So I think it'd be proper for them to have the name on the door or on a window identifying themselves.
Yeah, I know that we can require a license and a permit. That can be posted. But when we start having them name themselves, we would have to really think about, we'll have to get an attorney advice on that.
Okay.
I forcing signage, I just would prefer to run that through an attorney.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is a bigger issue than I think just working humans. And the reason I say that, there are no, I didn't see it, and I apologize if I failed to read it. There are no zoning requirements for having a gaming facility. And so you basically can do it anywhere in town. I mean, I could open up one of my house if I was one of those who got my stuff in. And so I really think we want to look at where do we want to allow this to occur. And I certainly, my sense is it ought to be in a commercial district, that's one. Two, it looks like we allow, I mean, unless I misunderstand it, you can't be intoxicated by gambling, but you can gamble, use these slots if the owner has a permit.
Right.
So basically, we're talking about 5 mini casinos with slot machines. That's really what we're talking about. It just kind of put them on the table. And I really think we want to think about what zones, what areas, and what our expectations are for that. Because my view is it's going to go from 5 places into all getting alcoholic beverage license, to serving food, to wherever. All the money's in the slots, but it's going to be whatever they do to bring people in to go work. And that's what's going through my mind is how do we do this in a way that works, and then are we going to limit the number of machines that an owner can have? Because in theory, if I got 1,000 square feet and each machine takes 10 square feet, I guarantee you I'm going for 100 machines in a heartbeat and filling it up. So we're going to end up, anyway, I think it's exactly the right thing for us to talk about. I have to admit I'm a little bit taken back by the push to go into the gaming business. So I'll be fine. Maybe I'm the only one. That's kind of my perspective.
I was looking at the same thing where you were allowed to have one where they've been at all 7 years, 300 feet away from a school or church.
Right. Well, we'll go back to work and we'll look at pushing this, pushing the idea around from a zoning perspective. Where should they go? Make sure we lock down I know previously we had a maximum amount that we approved on a conditional use permit that the person could add more machines. So then, the question is, do we want to expand the number of machines that we allow in the ordinance, but then say no on conditional use permits if you want to go beyond them? To limit those to, whatever that number is it 10, is it 12, per unit. Which I think there's got to be some thought into that, because otherwise somebody does get, 3,000 square feet, put in 30 of them. Yep. And then it becomes a little really mini gaming resort. Yep. Yep. And with layering on the alcohol and possibly food side of it too. I don't play these games of chance, so I'm not overly familiar with the appeal of them and what makes it good. I'm very familiar with the gaming casinos. Not that I use them, but there's got to be some allure. There's some way that they make these things to bring people in to spend their money. Yep.
Well, being Native American, which I am, our tribe, has a casino, and it is a real moneymaker. And so I think part of what we have to decide as a community is, do we want to attract that here? And if so, what are the implications associated? I think that's the bigger question for the world. Because, like I said, the game's a chance for people with slots that are part of what I call, or what are not-for-profits. I get that. It's a great way to raise money. It goes for a good cause, 501c3. I can get behind that, and that's not their primary purpose. It's how they raise money for scholarships or whatever. But when we're into it is all for profit. I can see someone coming in and buying a couple of three or some vacant blocks, and I'm like, they go to work and put their casino in, right? Because it's a great return on investment. I can just tell you, in the gaming industry, the highest return that is made is on slots, and nothing else compares. Nothing else comes even close. So when you think about poker tables, think about blackjack, roulette wheel, all of that, those are nice. The real money is in the slots. So the others just bring people in, but that's where they go. Yep.
Is this something that just became legal to have in Texas, or has it always been around?
The state recently required that communities allow them.
Is there a limit on how much can be bought on these little gaming rooms versus casinos, big money?
I don't know. I do know that every machine has to be certified at the state. So there's the manipulate. I think it's around the manipulation of what it pays out versus what it.
Yeah. Typically, what an operator will do is set the odds that they want to have. Of course, they're always going to be favorites in the house, and then they'll go and get it validated that it meets those requirements. Like pumping gas. If you go pump gas, it's going to certify when you get a gallon, you're getting a gallon. And the gas station will charge whatever they want. So the gaming machines are the same thing. If your odds are 97 for the house and 3% for the full slot machine, they're going to certify it. And they'll validate that's what you're getting. But that's why the slot machines make so much money. What happens in gaming industries where the states and the communities get the feedback, they have switched from a per machine basis to a gross revenue. So if the slot's making whatever, then the state gets X% of that revenue. And so it's very lucrative from the state perspective. I don't think the state of Texas has figured that out yet, but at some point they will. And so our strategy has been to have a per use fee, the license fee, and then per machine. And what the interest tells me, if people are running their business model, they're saying this is a heck of a deal. in terms of what we're charging. So I would certainly be in favor of the annual fee, because that says there's margin there, because I know the margin's there. And then how do we get paid off based upon the machine? So I think those are the things we really want to take a look at. Again, I'm happy to help look at it, because on one hand, the city would like the revenue.
Right.
On the other side, I think we want to understand what it means to our.
Well, let me sit down, talk with David a little bit further on some of the feedback, and then reach out individually to all of you, council and mayor, and then determine in January, February, when do we want to bring something back to another information discussion session where we can kind of pull together all these ideas and see if we can make something make sense for all.
Yeah, and so I have a strong bias for supporting the not-for-profit 501c3s and putting money back into already federally approved operations.
Yeah.
And then the commercial operators, there's a different set of rules for them.
Right.
Sorry to be so.
Well, I mean, that's why we put it on information discussions to have this discussion, so we can better understand where council is thinking and want to go, because these are sensitive issues. I don't think any of us want to make decisions in vacuum. Want to have the collective wisdom of all. Okay, good. Any other thoughts on? All right, I'll jump to number 3, which will be even more exciting. The utility billing ordinance. I've been building this one up for a little while. We had actually talked about some updates to the utility billing earlier this year, and the structurally, what I wanted to do with that utility billing ordinance in particular is take out the specific fees and costs that are associated throughout the ordinance and move that into an appendix. So we have how we operate as a policy or as an ordinance, that language as the core of the ordinance, and then the fee structure be the appendix. That way, from a city perspective, we can look at that every year as part of the budget cycle to say, are we charging the right rates for water, sewer, sanitation, and gas? And so part of what you saw in your packet was that extraction of all of those different fees into an appendix. Then the second phase of what we wanted to do was look at costs that are one-time versus costs that are continuous. So what I mean by a one-time fee is, what is the cost to implement a tap? That's a one-time fee to start service. What is the cost of your deposit? That's a one-time fee that somebody will get back eventually. And do some separation on those one-time fees. And then when I sat down with Megan and Johnny and Scott and Stephanie, it was looking at all of those one-time fees, most specifically our costs to put in taps, because that's where we were undercharging as compared to our cost, and get those one-time fees up to a level that match our cost from the city. And so ideally what I'd like to do as we enter 2021 and really targeting that March timeframe is, can we get those one-time, well, can we approve an ordinance where we extract the fees into an appendix, and then take those one-time fees and get them up to what our current cost levels are. Then the last thing we're doing is working on our costs to acquire specifically water, but also the cost of what it takes us to treat the wastewater, and build those cost models out, specifically looking at our capital, 5-year capital plan, and things that we have to really invest in our infrastructure. And then as we enter next year's budget cycle, look at what our current water, sanitation, and gas rates are, and determine at that point what that rate structure should look like in conjunction with our 5-year capital. And I know Councilor Stevenson brought up that as a portion of his request several months back, to not really touch people's monthly water rates or monthly sewer rates until we have a better representation of what that 5-year capital plan is going to look like. So Scott and I are off working with that, and been meeting with the engineers. We're looking at different ways to bring in water from the city perspective. So we'll be ready to handle that by the middle of this next fiscal year. But right now, in the short term, we'd like to move forward with pursuing this ordinance change that extracts the rate structure out in the appendix, and then we look at these one-time fees. So when you look in your packet, that table spreadsheet that was submitted on that proposed fee for March 1st, 2021, what we were really targeting there was those one-time fees as you go through all the different sections. You look downwards and you see where we highlighted things in yellow. I highlighted those to show that we weren't touching those monthly rates. We were leaving all of those the same. And so people that are getting the normal water bill, normal sewer bill, those aren't going to change if we adopt this new schedule. What will change is tap fees, put in a new tap. Got several of those. Really, the tap fees, you'll see like a 3/4 inch tap, section 9849 of the ordinance, we've been charging 500. Our real cost is closer to the $1,000 range.
Is putting in a new tap what you do with that new construction?
Yes. Typically, it's new construction. What we do have in some situations is we have some properties that over the years, people put on different structures on the property and didn't add a new tap. They just tied into their existing service. And so some structures require a new tap that are existing to go. The other piece that we really looked at and talked about was the impact fee on our streets. And so when we do have to cut streets, the cost for us to go back to actually do that work and then go back and repair it, we wanted to also capture those costs too as part of putting in the tap. I mean, generally speaking, right now, you put in a 3/4 inch tap and it's, you pay $500, it costs the city about $1,500 to $2,000. Put all of that in. Now, I will say, I've lived in communities before where you pay my house in Florida, you paid a $35,000 impact fee before you got started. We're not looking at certainly anything of that nature, but we do want to capture our costs. And we are looking at, all the work that Eddie and team have been putting in, the impacts on the streets, there's real cost for us to go out and repair those as well.
So my view, strategy is exactly what I want. Get it all into the separate appendix. I do have some questions in the appendix. What is a franchise application? So from $10 to $250, and I have no idea what it is. I don't.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that.
I'm sorry. Okay.
The rest of the security. Megan, are you still on? Because you're gonna have to refresh my memory on that franchise. Hey, Jim, is Megan still on? Can you pull her off mute for me?
She'll actually need to unmute herself. I requested she unmute though.
Okay. Come back to me.
I'm here. I was washing dishes. Sorry.
Okay. Franchise application fee on the utility billing ordinance.
Um.
Come to you on that one.
Okay. So clearly we do a lot of those, like zero probably. So you guys will figure out whether we need that or not. You'll find out. The security deposits, I'm amazed we didn't have it for the gas service. According to that, this is new.
They were different. So it was 100 for gas and it was 75 for water.
Okay.
And so we wanted to get those even.
Okay. And so the question I'm going to get is, why go from 75 to 100? Why not go from 100 to 75? And in my answer was very simple. Gee, we have enough people that walk that we ended up cashing in on $100. Right. And if the bill tends to be more than $100, so changing to 100 makes sense.
Minimum bill right now is 77 and change, so 75 I need to cover.
Gotcha. Okay, that was an answer I expected. Okay, so and you already described that cost. Now I'm about to bite myself in the rear end, okay, but I'm good at that. Dealing with the airport. We have no water meters at the airport other than one, and I have been wearing my city council hat, not wearing my pilot hangar hat. Right. Have been averse to the city going and putting individual water meters in because the city would never get a return on what it would cost to put all the meters in. Correct? Okay, correct. If the city were to change and say, oh, for those of you who have water, we're going to go put a water meter in, does this cover that cost? And I don't need an answer right now. I think it's just a good discussion to have with the airport advisory board to be able to talk about it, because I do think, now, there can't be a lot of water used out there. I mean, at my hangar, it's been flushing the toilet and running the sink, so there's not a lot of water consumption. And it's still not clear to me it would make sense to go do that, given the low volume of water that goes on. But it's a question, I think, a reasonable question. If you're gonna come back and say, hey, the city, we're pumping, 300,000 gallons of water a month, then I'd say we ought to go meter it. If we're pumping 1,000 gallons, then you'd say, hey, it's not worth it, because then you're going to penalize everyone for putting the water meters, because you can add service and all that other expense. I just think it's worth more for us.
No, I think so, and I just was thinking too, we've got a new employee that's going to be at the airport. It's transferring from our finance department.
Who is that guy? Holy moly! So I really did just by myself. Okay, no, it's not quick.
I think, Abel, this would be a great first project for you to start really working on and delving into what would make sense out
Yeah,
there with the water service.
I think your biggest consumer is in fact the terminal, which the city's going to continue on.
Right.
And you probably got maybe 10 hangars at most that have water. Don't use that a lot, but just, but I think that's a question.
Okay, Rick, I have an answer for you.
On the franchise fee, okay, thank you.
The reason why I couldn't remember is because it's right of way. So we can actually charge private companies to put lines in our right of ways, otherwise known as a franchise fee. No, it is not used very often, but like AT&T, all them that would come in, they would fall under that. Or if someone developed a housing area, that would fall in.
Okay, perfect.
So you may just want to modify the words a little bit, Megan, so we can all remember things. Franchise / right-of-way application.
Yes.
So bottom line, I think it's the right thing to go do.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll keep working this forward. My goal really is to have well, I've got Scott Perry coming to present the first meeting in January, and then we'll have Stephanie present either late January or first February, and I'll time, having all these changes and adjustments and the first reading of the ordinance with her being there. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Mayor, am I up next? Yes, number 4.
Yes, I'm on here.
All right. Certainly, we are vacant in the city attorney role right now. And the last couple of weeks since our last meeting, I have talked to certainly a couple of folks in the general area that have expressed some interest in the city attorney. So I wanted to get that out there. I don't know if anybody else on council has had some discussions as well. The one person that I had a very robust discussion was with Sandy Wilson, who is currently
Who's that again?
Sandy Wilson. And she's currently our district attorney, but she will be coming out of that role in a few weeks and expressed interest in the city attorney role. I also visited with Elizabeth Lewis, who had done some prosecutorial work for us. And her comment to me was she would be willing to fill in and help out on any sort of prosecutorial work if needed, similar to what she did in 2020. And both Sandy Wilson and Elizabeth Lewis are Marathon residents who practice law in the area. Elizabeth Lewis has a law office here locally. Sandy, of course, district attorney's office was here locally as well. From Eric's perspective on it, they are not residents of Alpine. They are outside of Alpine. They know, Alpine well. I think, Sandy has done a really nice job as the district attorney. So I just wanted to bring that out to the table. And I know, this is going to be an important position. I've got a couple things from a city perspective that we need to stay on diligently. The Union Pacific is one, as well as the work we're doing with Park Hill Smith and Cooper right now. So I've also got a couple encroachment items that have come up that will need guidance from our attorney. So,
Right. Yeah. I feel that
worked with Sandy Wilson too. Yes, sir.
I feel that we should have a local attorney where we don't have to pay any mileage or per diem as we did with the McCamey. Those are added expenses we don't need.
The only thing I see with that is that we have a very limited amount.
I can't hear you.
The only thing I see with that is that we have a very limited amount of local attorneys that would be willing to take on a position like this, I think.
Right, I understand that, and it's going to be a tough decision to make also. So, you know, I agree with you, councilperson.
Yeah, in my view, I'm a local but not local advocate. Local meaning they're local, they live here, but not local, they're influenced by what goes on in their personal relationships, because we all run into those sorts of problems. My recommendation would be that for the next meeting, we publicize that we council are going to go interview candidates. We do it in open forum and have a discussion, see what happens.
Absolutely. You know, I agree with you there because, you know, you're right. You know, we don't want any personal attachments or anything like that. I think, you know, it should be somebody that's not involved with anybody locally or anything like that. We want to be autonomous. So yes, let's go ahead and advertise it. Any other suggestions?
Nope, I think
Okay.
we'll, I'm good. Any other questions? All right, item number 5, Councilor Stevens.
So I've already been yakking enough, so I'll make this short. You know, I represent the city on the Brewster County Central Appraisal District Board, which is the board made up of 7 people who provide oversight to Denise Flores, the chief appraiser, and the 5 members on her team who do all the appraisals of the roughly 2,500 real property in the county, as well as the roughly 20,000 other elements that they have to go through on a regular basis. I happen to be the chair, so I have an obligation to come in and share, you know, just a quick review with council as your representative. We had our last meeting, and tell you financially, it's well managed. This last year we did 5 quarters using 4 quarters worth of budget because we changed the fiscal year. All that went off without a hitch. We have a plan to do the appraisals process for the next 2 years, and that is posted online and available. We meet the 3rd Tuesday of each month, and we meet for, it's been as short as 30 minutes, it's been as long as an hour and a half. Overall, some of the things that we've done is we've put in an automated system, so when the appraisers go out on site, they no longer have to use a piece of paper to write everything down and come back to the office to log it in. They're actually doing it in real time on the iPads. Is a very efficient way to get that done. The biggest challenge that the appraisers have is with the number of new construction going on, particularly outside of Alpine and in South County. There's been a number of new construction going on in Sierra Leone, as well as in South County. So we've got some pretty innovative strategies in place, and are going to pick up several $1 billion of new real property assets that we're able to tax and bring that revenue in, that we split appropriately across the taxing entities. There is not a requirement that the entities, as I said, of which there are 7, there's the hospital, there's the county, and then there are the various ISDs, of which there are 4 plus the city. Although I'm an elected official, the council will have the ability to determine if they would like a representative of council to do that going forward. or if someone from council, or if they'd like to appoint someone from council. So for example, Mo Morrow, who is not a representative of Commissioners Court, does that. Mo's been on the advisory of the board of directors for some time. The reason I raise that is I turn out come May, and council will have to make a determination of who would like to represent the council at that time. I'll just tell you, I'm happy to continue to represent council and to spend that time supporting and represent the city if the council didn't want to make a decision. So bottom line, well managed. We continue to keep track of it. We have goals and objectives in place for the team. And we get an annual assessment done by the state. It's called MAPS, MAPPS. There are some 20 requirements we have to fulfill. When I came on to the board of directors, we hadn't passed MAPS in a while. We're about to pass it for the first time in a long time. So I think we've got a good program in place that will offer. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I think council to start looking at here real quickly to assign to that position. You know, maybe here before we know it.
Yeah, so as I said, I have to continue doing, or representative council can do it. It's your choice. I just want to get ahead of the game so as we head into the next year, you all have had a chance. That's the end of my report.
So I think council are looking at it seriously. Who wants to volunteer to sit on it, or do we appoint somebody into it? So I think we should do that before the end of January. Question?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So let's move to item number 9. Action item to be accompanied by a brief statement of facts, including where funds are from, if applicable. Action items limited to up to 10 per meeting. After being called upon by the mayor or mayor pro tem, citizens are required to state their name and the ward in which they reside. Priority will be given to citizens of Alpine and those who own business or property in the city. Individuals who do not own or live in or own business in or property in the city limits of Alpine will be allowed to speak if time is available. Item number 1, that's going to go to Councilman Rodriguez.
Mayor, we need to go back to the consent agenda item, the approval of minutes.
Oh, yes, we got number 1, the consent agenda. Yes, please.
So, Mr. Mayor, I propose we approve the minutes that will move from the consent agenda to an action item with one edit, and that is to change paragraph 2 to recognize that Councilwoman Escobedo was not present for the meeting.
Correct. She had a
That's
death in the
motion.
family. Okay, so is there a second? Did someone second?
Murray seconded.
Okay, I could barely hear it. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand.
Got 4 here.
Betty? Okay, 5. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Now let's go ahead and go to item number 1, and that's Ms. Rodriguez.
Yes, I make the motion to discuss, consider, and take appropriate action on the first reading of recommendations from Chief Martin to change the speed limit to 20 miles per hour on city streets within the city of Alpine.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Maria seconded.
Maria seconded. Okay, now we'll go into discussion. Any discussion? I've got a comment to make on this, and I agree with Mr. Grief that about the speed limit. But as the chief also stated, they speed at 30, keep people from speeding at 20. And how do we enforce that? Chief, are you on?
Yeah, let me jump in real quick there.
Yes, sir.
I did have a chance to talk with Councilor Stevens a little bit as well. And Chief and I at first really talked about, number one, trying to create a level of consistency across the community from a speed perspective. Because when you look across Alpine, we've got some very different rates. And historically, what's happened is when we experience the more aggressive driving, we then lower the speeds. So if you look at like Fighting Buck, it got lowered to 20. Parts of Gallego got lowered to 20. And one of the larger, well, the second largest complaint that we get in the city is about speeding. The first is about illegal dumping. And we do know that predominance of speeding that happens in and around Alpine is Highway 90 or 67, coming in and out of the city, and then certainly along the one-ways in the community. This particular ordinance isn't necessarily looking at the highways. It's really looking at the residential areas. The second piece that Chief and I talked about a lot, and part of what he alluded to in his presentation last council meeting was, we have, Alpine's a very walkable community. We have a lot of people, foot traffic, bike traffic through town, and a lot of our streets are 26, 28 foot wide. And when, you have slower rates of speed, it does create a larger sense of safety within the community. And so it was really looking at, if we lowered it to 20, would that create, through some of the residential areas, a better place for kids to walk, people to walk, bike, things of that nature. I certainly understand there is pushback from people on wanting to lower that speed limit to 20, and they prefer to keep it, up at 30 miles an hour. I think from my perspective, as I look at it, think about the comments that have come in specifically the last few days, I just implore council to really contemplate, what is our strategy here in Alpine? What are our expectations around speed? And I think there are a lot of implications, no different than some of these other information discussion items we had earlier. And if we do want to promote an environment where it's safe to walk, it's safe to, for your kids to get on the bikes and ride around, part of that is thinking through, where do we set the speed limit in the community and what really makes sense, knowing our topography, knowing our layout, and things of that nature. Generally speaking, if you live in larger cities, you get into pocket neighborhoods and speed limits tend to go down quite a bit. It takes you maybe 3 or 4 blocks before you get out onto a main street. A lot of Alpine is 3 or 4 blocks before you get to the highway. And so, that's something else for us to really think about. I'm one that likes consistency. I think it's easier for us to administrate to it if we know that there's a consistent speed limit through town on the residential streets. I will also say, and this really hit me this afternoon, especially listening to Eddie and the work that he's doing with our streets department. The better our streets are, the quicker people drive. Case in point, when we finally fixed Fighting Buck, it became a speed zone there because people weren't navigating through the potholes. And so the better work we do on our street work, we also have, some challenges that come up. So anyway,
I
share that.
I agree with
He's got some thoughts as well.
No, I agree with you about the, but speed limit, I guess, my thoughts are, how do we enforce it? Because it's like Chris Webber said, you can put a sign up there and people are gonna ignore it unless it's, unless it's really enforced. So that's my concern about that. And you're right, these streets are like super highways now compared to what they were, and people tend to speed on them because it's a smoother road, it's faster. But yeah, I just think that we need to really think this out. We have to be consistent, like you said, in how we're gonna administer the speed and law, as far as the law enforcement aspect is concerned.
Right, so the other thing I asked Chief Martin to do this afternoon is pull together a report that looks at the last 12 to 18 months of tickets that have been written. So he can go into CopSync and he can pull the tickets, and then we'll look at that data and see the location where the tickets were. And then the other thing you want to look at is what was that citation? Was it 10 miles an hour or was it 20 miles an hour? So we want to pull together that data so that we have a good representation of the tickets that we've been writing around the community. The other thing I'm excited about is the next agenda item will be a nomination for a new municipal court judge, who I've had the pleasure of meeting and discussing, talking about accountability, right? So part of when we were looking through the data on our municipal court over the last several meetings, we did notice that we were writing a lot of speeding tickets, and many of them were being dismissed. And so from an accountability perspective, I do think that when you have a court system that is holding to the law, and you also have a prosecutor on your staff that is prosecuting the cases effectively, the message gets out to the community that this is not a place to speed through. And as the word gets out, the speed goes down. One other thing to note that Chief Martin reminded me of this afternoon was that from a city perspective, when we write speeding citations, most of that money ends up going to the state. So we're not really viewing this as a revenue generator type thing. And I know sometimes, when tickets get written, people get concerned that maybe we're doing it to try to generate some more revenue. But a lot of that really goes up to the state too. So just for all full disclosure, those are things that we're contemplating.
Given the chief to get statistics on the tickets written, would it be feasible to get also the warnings?
Yeah.
Because I mean, the speeding was done, it's just that for whatever reason, or at that time, they just issued a warning versus a ticket.
What's the speed limit today?
Good question. So by state law, if there's no posting, it's 30 miles an hour. So you have certain roads in the city that we reduced the rate to 20 miles an hour and posted those locations. Other places within the community, if there's no speed limit posted, then it defaults to 30.
So I'm just, having grown up in California as a California driver, I've always assumed it's 25 unless posted. And so I drive 25 unless posted. I can easily get behind a 25 mile an hour speed limit unless posted, because I think that heads us in the direction of being safe. At the same time, gives us the opportunity to work those other items. It's just the 20, and Eric and I talked earlier, all I've gotten is phone calls from the design people in Ward 5 that says you're not so good at 20. In fact, somebody called and says, "What, are you trying to make this everywhere's a school zone?" And I said, "What do you mean a school zone?" He says, "Well, school zones are 20. except if you're going by the elementary school, the elementary school makes it 10. So my bias is 25 makes sense unless otherwise posted. I think the other part, and this is a nuance in Ward 5, Alpine Country Club Estates is 30. We ought to leave that posted. And I think Brown is 30. In Ward 5 going from 5th up to the Loop is also 30. So I think there were others, as we talked earlier, other locations where there are these, for lack of a better term, like Brown is a thoroughfare where people are trying to get from 20 to 40 feet, they figured out. So I think understanding that would be very helpful, but I could easily get behind a 25 unless otherwise posted, and then let's talk about where those posters are. The other predominant concern I got was, and Eric, I voiced to you earlier, I have yet to drive East Avenue E or people might go make a point here to Holland without seeing someone speeding. I'm 30 and zip, zip, the cars are going by. I really think we need a strategy to focus on the speeders that are going through downtown, because I really worry about that. And they're going 40, 45. And it's not that I'm just making an estimate. Some, I've zip, I've sped up to say, okay, they're going 45, and then slow back down. And I know Chief's got lots of things to go work, but I really think that's an area we need to spend some time on. It's unfortunate we don't have a strong relationship with what goes on with the Texas Department of Safety, because I see them ride the loop all the time. They never ride East Avenue, they never ride. And so I think we're going to figure that out. So anyway, those are my. I think we need to work it. It's the broader strategy, but I think we need to work before we approach those.
Yeah, I think what we can do is pull that data on both the speeding and we'll pull the warnings as well, Chris, and look at that, and then make it. If we did 20 or 25, either one, we would have to post them. If we don't post, then it defaults to 30.
Okay, yeah,
That's just the state statute.
So where does the money come on that? Does that come from the streets or?
It would come from our general.
You almost have to put a sign at every street that goes into the neighborhood.
Right.
Because people are going to turn off 118, 67, 90 and go to zip on it.
Okay, so I amend my motion to take no action until we have information.
What was that again? No action on it?
I amend my motion to take no action until.
Okay. We can just go ahead and reschedule it at another council meeting and bring it back up again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
So let's do,
Is there going to be a second on the amendment, please?
there was a second. There was a second on it. Maria, I think.
Who was
Maria.
it?
I think it was Maria that did it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and reschedule this for another meeting then. And city manager.
Yes, sir. Item number
Okay.
2.
When will the chief have this data ready for us to review?
We should have it. I asked him to have it within a couple of weeks so we can distribute and people could look at it over Christmas.
Okay,
Yes, either the first meeting in January or the second.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's go ahead and then let's move to item 2. And city manager.
Mayor, item 2 is to discuss, consider, take appropriate action on your recommendation of municipal court judge by Mayor Owens.
So, Mr. Mayor, I
Yes, sir.
propose that the city council take action to approve Jody Cole as the municipal court judge for the city of Alpine.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion's made and discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ms. Cole. I met her about a month ago, and it was kind of an interview, and I was very, I guess, very enthusiastic about recommending her to be our municipal judge. She's very enthusiastic about our city. She wants to be part of the city, and that's what I liked about it. She also has her office and home here in Alpine. And looking at her resume, very impressive also. And I think most of you have read it. It was on the agenda. And so I highly recommend this lady. A lot of experience behind her, and she has a love for this city and wants to make it, wants to improve it. So I highly recommend that council approve her as our new municipal judge. Ms. Cole, are you here? Are you present?
Yes, she's here, Mayor.
I am here. Thank you.
Okay, hey, how you doing?
Almost.
Okay, do we have any more discussion on it? Yes, sir.
So Jody and I spent 75 minutes on the phone one day, having what I thought, and Mayor, I would echo your comments concerning Jody's background, particularly from a legal perspective, and being local but not local. One of the things that I also found very important is in my tenure on council, we've had a number of eminently qualified lawyers fill the role of our municipal court judge. But Jody brings additional experience to the table, which is about process and ways to make our process better. Which for me is critically important because, as I mentioned before, when I came on council, there's a 4-year period in which your best strategy for getting a ticket, if you got one in Alpine, was just tear it up, throw it away because nothing was going to happen. And what Jody has is not only an understanding of the law, but understanding the people, and an understanding of process management, which to me is, we really need that in the worst way. There's no doubt in my mind, I support Jody for being our municipal judge.
Yes, and reading her resume, I was amazed at the wealth of the education, the experience that she has. And that's why I've talked to her 3 times now, and I was very impressed. She does have organizational skills, which is highly needed. And she's very motivated is the second one in getting the municipal court up and running. So council, and more discussion on it. Okay, well then I'm gonna call for the vote. All those in, Ms. Jody Cole, being a new municipal judge, raise your right hand.
Got 4 here.
4 here, 5 on the screen. Okay, unanimous. New municipal judge. And Eric and I had discussed about her oath, and Eric will get together with the district judge on that to swear her in.
Judge,
So congratulations, Ms. Cole.
Mayor, we've got the judge lined up for tomorrow. I'll send you that invite. You can attend via Zoom if you'd like.
Very good. Yeah, give me a call. It's Is he gonna be present there at the city hall?
No, he would prefer to do it via Zoom.
Okay, well, we can do that. Jody, are you comfortable with that?
I am, I'll be there and I'm honored and thank you. And if I can be excused, I'll go to work.
Thank you. Go work.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Congratulations. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to item number 3 and discuss and take appropriate action to rezone the property with primary locations address of 102 East Nations in the Walton Addition, C1 to R2, the specifics being rezoned are Lot 4, Lot 5, Lot 6, north half of Lot 3, east 1/3 of Lot 7, and east 1/3 of north half of Lot 8. City Manager.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, I had to think a long time and read this survey very diligently to make sure this wording is correct. But it is correct, and it will allow for Mr. Martin Benovich to sell his property. And so we're basically rezoning the residential portion of it, and then the commercial portion where he has his business, he's selling off the residential portion. So we need to do this rezone.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
I propose that we rezone the property with the primary location address of 102 East Nations in the Walton Addition from C1 to C2 based upon the survey that's included as part of this motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Maria just seconded it.
Okay, and motion's made, second.
C1 to R2.
I'm sorry, C1 to R2, I said backwards. Sorry about that. Yep, C1 to R2.
C1 to R2.
Yes, sir.
So I just want to comment, this is in Ward 5. And I want to thank Eric and David for working the details behind this so that Martin can proceed forward. Martin has been a long time resident of the city. When it came time to sell this, he had a few things to go sort through. Thanks, Eric, for working this through to make sure all the legalities are worked in such a way that this transaction can go forward.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
Here you have 4 in the room.
Okay, and 5 with Betty. It's unanimous. Thank you all very much. And then we'll go to item number 4, City Manager.
Item number 4 is to discuss, consider, and take appropriate action relative to the Brewster County attestation regarding the state of Texas Governor Executive Order GA 32, minimizing occupancy for said businesses from 75% to 50%. I think we talked about specifically what our plans were in my city manager report tonight, and unless anybody on council wants to take any action on this, I'm okay with just tabling this for this evening.
So you want to table it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and table it then. And so let's move to item number 10. And we'll start with Councilman Rodriguez. I'm sorry, yeah. Councilman Rodriguez, you're on.
There's a lot of good conversations today. Got a lot of work ahead of us. I'm looking forward to working with all of y'all.
Okay, we'll go with Maria.
Great meeting. Thanks for letting me show up.
Okay. And council, don't forget to put your mask on, please. Okay, well, Mr. Sandate.
No comments.
Mr. Sandate? No comment? Okay, let's move over. What's that? Okay, Councilman Stevens. Comment. Okay, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. Be safe. Wear your
Mayor,
mask. And
Mayor, Councilor
Sir.
Stevens has one.
I can't hear you.
Betty Fitzgerald, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Betty. And you're right in front of me. You're the quiet one. Thank you.
No comment.
No comment, no comments. Okay. Now I guess I'm clear to say something. Be safe. Oh, no, I went to you. I asked you and I thought you said no comment. I'm sorry.
Well, you know me, Mayor, I've always got some.
I know it. You know, I should have known better.
No, I want to echo Chris's comments. This has really been a good meeting. I think we've got lots of meaty things to talk about. And what Eric has put together from an ordinance standpoint, I think our challenge from the council standpoint is to get engaged on those items where we think we can not only bring value, but help bring solutions forward, particularly amongst the community. Probably one of my biggest concerns or worries is that, you know, we all get elected, we're on council, and then, you know, keeping the dialogue going amongst the community. So I'm really looking forward to next year when we start diving into a lot of the items that we need to work through. And the other, I would say, this is our last meeting of the year. So hope everyone has a Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, whatever you choose to do, and enjoys the month of December, and look forward to a bright, engaging, and terrific meeting. Now I'm not married.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Yes, it was a good council meeting. We had a great discussion. We accomplished a lot this evening. Also want to again congratulate our new municipal judge. She has her work cut out for her, and I'm sure she's going to do a fantastic job there. It's been a very trying year with the virus. The council has been unified in this action, going back to when we first started back in March. Actually, we were the first ones ahead of the state that took action on trying to protect our citizens, and wearing the mask and stuff like that. Maybe through inexperience, we went a little overboard. We corrected ourselves, and we were doing good until school graduation happened. Then we started to spike, and then Halloween came around, and no telling what Thanksgiving has brought us. But we have to stay vigilant. We have to keep our residents notified and informed to be sure to wear their masks, stay at home as much as possible. We can't force anybody to do that, but it sure helps, not being out there in the community without, the proper distancing and what have you. So all we got to do is just follow the three things, your high mask and social distancing. And I think we should be the leaders. We are the elected leaders of the city, and we should go ahead and promote that. When you see somebody that's getting too close without wearing masks, that I know I pull on my mask when I go to the grocery store a lot when I see somebody without one, and they kind of look at me a little weird, but I think they get the hint from what I'm trying to tell them. But we are with our COVID group discussions on our Tuesday meetings and stuff. And we're being very proactive, just to find, innovative ways to keep our residents safe. So I think with that, we also need to educate them, which is something that the group has decided that we're going to do, get more PSAs out there for public, so they know what's going on, stuff like that. And, Facebook has done a lot of damage as far as telling people not to wear face masks for one reason or another. But, they need to listen to our professionals, and not somebody that's on Facebook thinking they're a doctor. And I might get beat up on that, but, that's fine. I'm just trying to help our public to stay safe. And with that said, we had a trying year. Let's look for 2021 to be a better year. And with that, y'all have a Merry Christmas and be safe. So we don't have any executive meeting. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
What's that?
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, is there a second?
Maria
Okay, I heard a
second.
second. Heard the second in the background. It's not debatable, so we're adjourned. Have a great evening.